Episode 1 The Uninvited Guest. Welcome to the first episode of Shell's Spooky Stories. I'm your host, and tonight I have a bone-chilling story that will make you think twice before embarking on a ghost hunt. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for the uninvited guest. I'd always been intrigued by the supernatural, but it wasn't until last year that I decided to join a public ghost hunt. It was advertised as a thrilling night exploring the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The asylum had always fascinated me, with its crumbling walls and dark history. This was my chance to experience the paranormal firsthand. When I arrived at the asylum, the night was crisp and clear. About 20 thrill seekers had gathered, all eager for a scare. Our guide, a seasoned paranormal investigator named Mark, welcomed us with a reassuring and unsettling grin. Tonight we delve into the darkest corners of the asylum. Keep your torches close, your minds open. Remember, respect the spirits, and they might just respect you back, said Mark enthusiastically. As we entered the asylum, the air grew colder. The once grand building was now decaying. A relic, its hallways filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. Mark led us through the main hall, recounting tales of tragic deaths and lingering spirits. He spoke of the asylum's grim history, the overcrowded wards, the cruel treatments, and the patients who never left. Many who entered these walls were forgotten by society, left to suffer in silence. Some say their spirits are still trapped here, unable to move on, said Mark. We used EMF meters and spirit boxes and even attempted a seance. At one point we gathered in what was once the dining hall, now a vast empty space echoing with our footsteps. Mark handed out dowsing rods, and we asked questions into the void. The rods moved on their own, crossing and uncrossing in response. Is anyone here with us? I said curiously. The rods responded, and a chill ran down my spine. We continued our exploration, moving through the dilapidated rooms, each with its own story of sorrow and despair. But it wasn't until we reached the basement that the real terror began. The basement was a place of nightmares, dark, damp, and oppressive. It had been used to house the most disturbed patients. The air was heavy with a sense of dread, and the walls seemed to close in all around us. As Mark told us the stories of the suffering and despair, I felt a sudden, intense chill. My breath misted in the air, and a sense of dread settled over me. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on my imagination. This is where the most dangerous patients were kept, those deemed beyond help. It's said that their anger and pain still lingers here today, said Mark. We continued deeper into the basement, and that's when I saw it, a figure barely visible in the shadows, standing in the corner of the room. It was tall and dark, with eyes that seemed to burn into my soul. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Does anyone else see that? I said. A few people turned their torches towards the corner, but the figure was gone. Mark assured us that seeing apparitions was common in the basement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The figure felt malevolent, like it was watching me. We finished the tour without further incident, and I returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. As I settled into bed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been in my head, but sleep didn't come easily. My dreams were filled with visions of the asylum and the shadowy figure. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered, and there was an overwhelming sense of being watched. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the incidents became more frequent and more disturbing. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispers. They were faint, but they were definitely there. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing. I sat up, my heart racing, and scanned the room. Nothing. but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I started to notice other strange occurrences. Mirrors in my house would fog up, revealing handprints that were too small to be mine. I'd find my belongings moved or scattered, as if someone had been searching through them. The once familiar creaks of my house began to sound like footsteps pacing just outside my door. Desperate for answers, I contacted Mark. He agreed to come to my house and brought along some equipment to conduct an investigation. As soon as he stepped inside, he looked uneasy. "There's definitely something here," he said. We set up EMF meters and cameras, and almost immediately the devices picked up high levels of activity. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to dance just out of sight. Then, through the static of the spirit box, a voice broke through. It was faint, but unmistakable. "Help me." My blood ran cold. The voice was the same one I'd heard in my dreams. Mark looked at me, his expression grim. "It seems you've brought something back with you," he said. Mark suggested that we perform a cleansing ritual. He explained that sometimes spirits attach themselves to people or objects, and the best way to get rid of them was through a thorough cleansing. We started with a sage smudging, moving from room to room, filling the house with pungent smoke. Mark chanted softly, calling on the spirits to leave. For a moment it seemed to work. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling lifted, but it didn't last. As night fell, the whispers returned, louder and more intense. Shadows flickered in the edge of my vision, and I felt an icy breath on my neck. "What do you want?" I said frantically. There was no response, just the relentless whispering. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with fear and exhaustion. The next morning I called Mark again. This time he brought a medium named Sarah, who had years of experience dealing with malevolent spirits. Sarah walked through my house, her eyes closed, murmuring softly. She paused in the hallway, her face growing pale. "There's a strange, very strong presence here. It's angry and confused." She suggested we perform a more powerful ritual, one that would require a significant amount of energy. We prepared for the ritual that evening, setting up candles and placing protective symbols around the house. Sarah and Mark led the ceremony, calling on protective spirits and ancestors to help banish the malevolent entity. The air grew thick with energy, the candles flickering wildly. The whispers grew and the temperature plummeted. I could feel the presence, its anger, the pain pressing down on me. Sarah's voice rose, commanding the spirit to leave. "You are not welcome here. You must go back to where you came from." Suddenly there was a loud crash, and the room went silent. The oppressive feeling lifted, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of peace. Sarah and Mark assured me that the spirit was gone, but they warned me it might try and return. They left me with protective charms and instructed me on how to keep the spirit at bay. For a while things were quiet, the house felt normal again, and I began to relax. But one night I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. My heart raced, but I knew what to do. I grabbed the protective charms and recited the incantations that Sarah had taught me. The whispering faded, and the sense of being watched dissipated. Despite the calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. I started to research the history of the asylum more deeply, hoping to find answers. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. What I found was even more disturbing. The asylum had a particularly notorious patient, a man named Henry Woldsworth. He had been committed after a series of violent incidents and was known for his malevolent behaviour. Henry had died in the basement under mysterious circumstances. Some believed he was being tortured by the staff, others said he had taken his own life. Either way, his spirit was said to be restless and vengeful. Determined to learn more, I visited the asylum's groundskeeper, an elderly man named Tom. He had worked there for decades and had seen and heard things that defied explanation. Henry was a troubled soul. They say he never left. I've heard whispers, seen his shadow. You shouldn't have gone down there, said Tom. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I asked him if there was any way to put Henry to rest. Spirits like Henry are bound by their pain. You need to find out what he wants. What's keeping him here? I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. That night, I decided to confront the spirit. I set up a camera in my bedroom and spoke into the darkness. Henry, if you're here, show yourself. Tell me what you want. The room grew cold and the air thickened. I felt a presence, but nothing appeared. I waited, repeating my request. Then the whispering began again, more coherent this time. Help me find peace. I spent the next few nights trying to communicate with Henry. Each time the whispers became clearer, revealing fragments of his past. He spoke of pain, betrayal, and a desire for release. He wanted the world to know his story and to be remembered not as the monster, but as the man who suffered. I documented everything and shared it with Mark and Sarah. Together we decided to hold a final ritual, one that would help Henry find peace. We gathered at the asylum in the basement where Henry had died. With candles and protective symbols, we called on the spirits once more. Henry, we are here to help you. You are remembered. Your pain is acknowledged. It's time to move on, said Sarah. The air crackling with energy, the room grew colder. We felt a presence, heavy and sorrowful. Then a soft breeze passed through, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The candles flickered, and the shadows seemed to recede. Rest in peace, Henry, said Mark. We stood in silence, feeling the weight of the moment. The basement felt different, lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. We left the asylum, hoping that Henry had finally found peace. Back at home, the activity ceased. The whispers stopped, and the oppressive feeling never returned. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that Henry's spirit was no longer trapped. The experience left me with a profound respect for the paranormal and a lingering awareness of the thin veil between our world and the next. So, if you ever decide to go on a ghost hunt, remember my story. Sometimes the spirits you seek are more than happy to follow you home, and sometimes they just need someone to help them find peace. Thank you for joining me. It's a haunting reminder that the line between our worlds and the spirit's world is thinner than we think. For those brave enough to explore the unknown, always remember to respect the spirits and be prepared for the consequences. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on. If you have a ghostly story that you'd like to share with us, please send it to shellspookystories@yahoo.co.uk. Your story could be featured in our next episode. Sweet dreams and beware of the shadows.